Yes, you guys heard me correctly. The numbers are in. And just like I told you, there was a boycott.
You got to understand, these numbers, they did like 2 million viewers. That's up from 2023. 2023 was a little over 900,000. So it is up. So the numbers are going up. But compared to last year, it fell by 40%.
Oh, so they going to try to spin it. Okay, it could be the second most watched of all time. Of course, it's going to be that, but compared to last year, you still down 36%.
But like, it is another situation than pretending like Caitlin Clark doesn't exist.
They want to make the trajectory look like it's going up and not down. It's whatever, man. We see what's going on.
They're trying to make it so that the data looks as favorable as possible.
ESPN didn't want to show the ratings were down from WNBA All-Star Game because Caitlin Clark didn't play, so they just used the 2023 numbers instead.
ESPN lying again.
ESPN just got caught red-handed manipulating WNBA All-Star Game ratings to hide the catastrophic impact of Caitlin Clark's absence, and the evidence is so damning that even their own journalists are publicly calling them out for misleading the public. When the 2025 All-Star Game in Indianapolis saw a devastating 36% ratings collapse from 3.4 million viewers down to just 2.2 million, ESPN decided to completely ignore last year's numbers and instead compare against 2023 to create a fake narrative about historic growth that doesn't exist. What makes this deception even more outrageous is that the game was held in Clark's home arena of Indianapolis, meaning this should have been the biggest celebration in WNBA history, but instead it became a disaster that ESPN desperately tried to spin as success through pure statistical manipulation.
They're just skewing data.
So it's up 158% compared to 23. What happened to 24? Y'all just gonna skip over 24? Like, what?
Thing is, this could be disingenuous too. That's the bad side of it, because for some reason they have a thing where they want to compare everything without Caitlin. They're like, oh, well, she's an anomaly. So we could compare these numbers to 2023 and show you that without Caitlin, it's growing.
This is very similar to the WNBA draft, comparing it to 2023. Very similar to how they are presenting this graphic.
The injury that started this entire controversy happened on July 15th when Clark re-aggravated a groin problem during the Fever's win over Connecticut, and within hours of her announcing she couldn't participate in All-Star Weekend, ticket prices crashed 48% from $121 down to just $64, proving that casual fans were literally rejecting a WNBA showcase without their biggest star. This wasn't just a minor setback for the league, it was a complete economic meltdown that exposed exactly how dependent the entire WNBA has become on one 23-year-old player who has already missed 10 regular season games this year due to various injuries, making this her most injury-riddled campaign ever after never missing a single game in college or during her rookie season. If you think ESPN's manipulation proves they know Caitlin Clark is the only thing driving WNBA success, comment ESPN exposed, and let me know whether you believe mainstream sports networks can be trusted when they have financial stakes in the leagues they cover.
So for all the people that thought that it wasn't a boycott against this All-Star Game, it was, bro. People was just DMing me, telling me that they weren't going to look at it. People was telling me that they refunded their tickets. I was even supposed to be there, and I decided not to go because of the things with the referees and the WNBA disrespecting Caitlin.
1,250,000 viewers. Woof, out of existence. No Caitlin Clark, not tuning in.
So all of you guys can sit there and say, oh, you guys are just trying to uplift one player. Oh, the league is more than one. I agree, the league is more than one player. It's more than one good basketball player. But is there more than one player that moves the tide? No. We just have to be honest. It's okay.
There is fans that are just Caitlin Clark fans. I said this yesterday. If Caitlin Clark was to leave to go to New York or any other damn team, expect significant impact in the Indiana Fever viewership, bro. People might tune in for that first season without Caitlin if she was to leave, but after that, it is over with.
There was plenty of people I saw online who said, yo, Caitlin Clark not playing. Oh, she's hurt and they don't want to call fouls. Okay, I'm not giving them a view. I'm not going to watch. There was plenty of people that boycotted watching this WNBA All-Star Game.
You can see when Caitlyn doesn't play, it halves. And how are we meant to know that if Caitlyn ends up missing a year, Caitlyn's gone, that all those fans don't just leave again?
They know they need Caitlin Clark to grow this league, man.
ESPN's statistical sleight of hand became even more obvious when you examine exactly how they crafted their misleading, historic viewership narrative by cherry-picking data points that painted the rosiest possible picture while completely ignoring the massive decline that actually occurred. Instead of honestly reporting that All-Star viewership dropped by over 1 million people compared to 2024, ESPN's official social media accounts and press releases emphasized that the 2025 game was up 158% from 2023, when Clark was still playing college basketball and the WNBA was essentially invisible to mainstream audiences. This wasn't an accident or oversight. It was a calculated decision to manipulate public perception by using the most favorable comparison possible while burying the truth about what happens when their marquee attraction isn't available. And the deception becomes even more transparent when you realize they've spent the entire season crediting Clark with driving unprecedented league growth, but suddenly pretended individual players don't matter when her absence caused a ratings disaster. The network also heavily promoted Friday night's skills challenge and three-point contest numbers, which drew 1.3 million viewers and represented an 89% increase from last year, but they conveniently ignored crucial context that would have explained this bump had nothing to do with overall league health and everything to do with format changes and scheduling adjustments that typically boost viewership regardless.
Why not just not put up 153? Just say 2.2 million average viewers and then just say second most watched All-Star game ever behind 2024, which is fine. You don't even have to say how down bad it is. It's a PR page.
Instead of trying to down Caitlin Clark and diminish her to the level that other people may be at, why don't you promote the other people alongside of Caitlin Clark's greatness?
If Caitlin Clark was in it, we're going to say it's up on non-Caitlin Clark numbers because, you know, Caitlin Clark's just an anomaly. Caitlin Clark's not a player. Caitlin Clark is not relevant to this. Caitlin Clark is an anomaly.
Y'all are trying to straddle the fence. We want your money, but we don't want you. Which one is it? Which one is it? We want the viewership, but we only want viewership from certain people's fans. We want the ratings up, but we don't want these type of like, no, do you want it or not? You got to accept what comes with everything. The good, the bad, the ugly.
The devastation that Clark's withdrawal caused goes far beyond television ratings and extends into every aspect of the WNBA's economic ecosystem, from ticket sales to merchandise revenue to corporate sponsorship value, creating a complete market collapse that ESPN's coverage tried desperately to hide from public view. The 48% ticket price drop from $121 to $64 wasn't just a minor market adjustment, it was a complete rejection of the product by consumers who had purchased tickets specifically to see Clark compete in her home market of Indianapolis, and this collapse happened within hours of her injury announcement, proving that casual fans have zero interest in WNBA basketball without their primary attraction. Social media was flooded with fans announcing they were canceling travel plans, selling tickets, and simply not watching the All-Star game because Clark wouldn't be participating, creating exactly the kind of fan boycott that ESPN's manipulated statistics were designed to minimize and hide from potential advertisers and corporate sponsors.
Now, many other people stated that, you know what, it was sold out. It was not a boycott. Well, you know the old saying, men lie, women lie, and the numbers don't. This is a case of the numbers not lying.
I believe that it's everything also leading up to this. I mean, talk about leading up to this. The officiating, I think enough fans had it up to here with the league as a whole. People had it up to here. You got to understand. Caitlin Clark is getting beat up in these games. The refs aren't calling anything. Kathy Engelbert seems to have air between both of her ears. She seems to have pure air floating between her ears. And I think people are fed up.
And what led up to this whole situation is the WNBA referees not giving Caitlin Clark a fair whistle. The whistle played into facts when it comes to this WNBA All-Star game. I don't give a damn how people try to spin it, cut it. You cannot cut the facts. And the facts is the WNBA All-Star game was a disaster before it even started.
Kathy Engelbert, this should be a perfect example of why you need to get your officiating cleaned up and you need to have a talk with your players in the league. And nobody's asking you to hold Caitlin Clark's hand. Just play fair and stop with the WWE bullshit.
The economic impact extended beyond just the All-Star Game itself and affected every business in Indianapolis that had been counting on Clark-driven tourism revenue, from hotels and restaurants to retail establishments that had stocked up on Fever merchandise specifically for the weekend. And ESPN's coverage completely ignored this broader economic devastation while focusing only on carefully selected statistics that made the situation appear less catastrophic than it actually was. Even more damaging for the league's long-term prospects is how Clark's absence exposed the complete lack of drawing power among other WNBA stars, as players like Nafisa Collier, who scored a record-breaking 36 points and won All-Star MVP honors, couldn't generate even a fraction of the interest that Clark brings simply by existing, proving that the league's star-making machinery has completely failed to develop anyone else capable of driving mainstream audience engagement. The industry backlash against ESPN's statistical manipulation was swift and brutal, with respected journalists like Christine Brennan publicly questioning why the network's PR department continues to mislead followers, instead of honestly reporting about WNBA viewership trends and the obvious impact of individual star players on audience engagement. Brennan's direct tweet calling out ESPN for promoting historic viewership when the numbers actually represented a huge drop from last year became a viral moment that exposed the network's deceptive practices to a much wider audience than would have otherwise paid attention to. WNBA coverage controversies. Sports Business Journal reporter Austin Karp provided even more damaging context by documenting how the Caitlin Clark effect manifests itself in two ways. Anything with Clark gets massive numbers, and anything without Clark drops hard, citing the 36% All-Star decline alongside similar drops in other events when she's absent, creating a comprehensive picture of league dependency that ESPN's manipulated coverage was specifically designed to obscure. When your own industry colleagues are publicly calling out your statistical integrity and questioning your journalistic standards, you've crossed a line from corporate messaging into outright deception, and the fact that multiple independent sports media professionals felt compelled to fact-check ESPN's official coverage reveals just how blatant and problematic the network's manipulation actually was. What makes ESPN's comparison to 2023 even more revealing is that it essentially admits the WNBA operates in two completely different eras, before Clark and after Clark, with entirely separate audience expectations and business realities that make direct comparisons meaningless unless you're trying to hide current problems. By using 2023 as their baseline instead of 2024, ESPN was implicitly acknowledging that the Clark era represents such a fundamental shift in WNBA popularity that normal year-over-year analysis doesn't apply, which creates a massive problem for their narrative about sustainable league growth that doesn't depend on one individual player. The before Clark era that ESPN used for comparison featured All-Star games that regularly drew fewer than 1 million viewers and regular season games that often couldn't crack 500,000, making the 2024 explosion look even more dependent on individual star power than ESPN wants to admit to potential advertisers and corporate partners. This statistical manipulation also undermines ESPN's own previous coverage throughout the season, where they consistently credited Clark with driving record-breaking viewership and attendance figures, because if individual players don't matter enough to warrant honest year-over-year comparisons, then their entire narrative about Clark's impact becomes contradictory and unreliable. The CBA connection makes ESPN's ratings manipulation even more problematic because WNBA players are currently in the middle of crucial salary negotiations where television viewership numbers directly impact their leverage in demanding higher compensation from league ownership. The "Pay Us What You Owe Us" shirts that players wore during All-Star Weekend warm-ups were specifically designed to highlight the disconnect between growing league popularity and stagnant player salaries, but ESPN's attempt to hide the 36% ratings decline through statistical tricks actually undermines the players' negotiating position by creating false impressions about revenue, sustainability, and audience engagement. Players have been using ratings growth as their primary evidence for why they deserve significantly increased compensation, with stars like Clark and Nafisa Collier pointing to record-breaking viewership as proof that the league's value has exploded beyond current salary structures but ESPN's manipulated coverage makes it impossible to have honest conversations about what that growth actually looks like when you remove Clark from the equation. The timing of ESPN's deception during active CBA negotiations creates additional ethical problems because the network's financial relationship with the WNBA means their coverage directly affects business decisions worth millions of dollars, and corporate sponsors who rely on accurate viewership data to evaluate their investments are being misled about actual audience trends and the volatility that comes with Clark dependency. The broader implications of ESPN's statistical manipulation extend far beyond just WNBA coverage and reveal fundamental problems with how corporate media handles sports properties they have financial stakes in, prioritizing narrative protection over journalistic integrity in ways that ultimately serve no one's long-term interests. When networks feel compelled to lie about basic viewership numbers during what should be celebratory events, it indicates deep concerns about league sustainability and growth trajectories that honest reporting would expose, creating an environment where corporate messaging is disguised as objective journalism and viewers can't trust the information they're receiving from supposedly authoritative sources. ESPN's decision to sacrifice credibility for short-term narrative protection suggests they're more interested in maintaining lucrative broadcasting partnerships than providing accurate sports coverage, which creates long-term damage to their reputation as a news organization and makes viewers increasingly skeptical about their coverage of any sport or league where they have business relationships. The fan response to ESPN's manipulation has been overwhelmingly negative, with social media users immediately recognizing and calling out the statistical tricks being used to hide Clark's impact, suggesting that audiences are becoming more sophisticated about media manipulation and less willing to accept corporate spin as legitimate reporting. This growing skepticism creates serious challenges for ESPN's future WNBA coverage because once viewers stop trusting your statistics and analysis, it becomes much harder to build the loyal audiences that advertisers value and corporate partners expect, potentially creating a vicious cycle where declining credibility leads to declining viewership that makes their WNBA investment even less valuable. The most damaging long-term consequence may be how ESPN's deception contributes to the perception that women's sports coverage is inherently less trustworthy and more susceptible to corporate influence than men's sports journalism, undermining efforts to build serious mainstream credibility for leagues like the WNBA that desperately need objective analysis rather than promotional coverage disguised as news reporting. The international implications of ESPN's deceptive coverage extend beyond American sports media and affect how global audiences perceive both the WNBA and American sports journalism standards, as international broadcasters and media partners rely on ESPN's reporting to understand league health and growth trends when making their own investment decisions about women's basketball coverage. ESPN's manipulation creates ripple effects throughout the global sports media ecosystem because international partners who don't have direct access to American audience data trust ESPN's analysis when deciding whether to pursue broadcasting rights, sponsorship deals, or coverage partnerships, meaning the network's dishonesty potentially affects business decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars across multiple continents and media markets. The deception becomes even more problematic when you consider that the WNBA has been actively pursuing international expansion opportunities and global audience development, with Commissioner Kathy Engelbert frequently discussing plans for international games, overseas marketing initiatives, and partnerships with foreign broadcasters who need accurate audience data to evaluate the league's actual commercial viability rather than ESPN's manipulated version of success. What makes this particularly damaging is that international sports media professionals are often more sophisticated about American audience trends than ESPN assumes, meaning their deception is likely being noticed and discussed by global media executives who now have additional reasons to question the reliability of ESPN sports coverage and the actual health of American women's professional sports leagues. The corporate sponsorship implications of ESPN's statistical manipulation create additional layers of potential legal and financial liability because major brands that have signed multi-year WNBA partnership deals based on growth, projections, and audience data provided by ESPN may have grounds for contract disputes if they can prove they were misled about actual viewership trends and audience stability. Companies like Nike, Gatorade, and Wilson have invested millions of dollars in WNBA partnerships based partly on television audience growth that ESPN has been promoting throughout the season. But if those companies discover that growth is entirely dependent on one player whose injury history makes her unreliable for consistent participation, they may seek to renegotiate terms or withdraw from agreements that no longer meet their marketing objectives. The potential for corporate backlash extends beyond just direct WNBA sponsors and includes ESPN's own advertising partners who purchase commercial time during WNBA broadcasts based on audience projections and demographic data that the network provides, meaning ESPN's manipulation could affect their own revenue streams if advertisers lose confidence in the accuracy of viewership reporting and demand lower rates or more flexible contracts that account for Clark-dependent volatility. Even more concerning for ESPN's long-term business relationships is how their deceptive coverage sets a precedent for how they might handle other sports properties where they have financial stakes, creating uncertainty among potential partners about whether the network can be trusted to provide honest analysis versus promotional coverage disguised as journalism when their business interests are involved. The technological and streaming platform implications of ESPN's manipulation become increasingly important as sports media consumption shifts toward digital platforms where audience measurement and engagement metrics are more precise and harder to manipulate than traditional television ratings that allow for creative statistical interpretation. ESPN+, Disney+, and other streaming services that carry the All-Star Game have access to detailed engagement data that reveals not just how many people watched, but how long they stayed engaged, when they stopped watching, and what content they accessed before and after the game, creating a much more complete picture of audience behavior that makes ESPN's television-focused manipulation seem outdated and potentially counterproductive. The streaming data likely shows even more dramatic drops in engagement and completion rates when Clark isn't participating because digital audiences have more options and less patience for content that doesn't meet their expectations, meaning ESPN's attempt to hide television ratings declines may actually be minimizing much larger problems with digital audience retention that could affect future streaming revenue and partnership negotiations. This creates additional pressure on ESPN to maintain their deceptive practices because admitting the full scope of Clark dependency would require acknowledging that their entire digital strategy for women's sports may be built on unsustainable foundations that collapse whenever key players are unavailable, potentially affecting stock prices and investor confidence in Disney's sports media investments. The psychological and cultural impact of ESPN's manipulation extends into broader discussions about media literacy and public trust in sports journalism, as younger audiences who grew up with social media and independent content creators become increasingly skeptical of traditional media outlets that appear to prioritize corporate interests over honest reporting. Generation Z and younger millennial sports fans are particularly adept at recognizing statistical manipulation and corporate messaging, meaning ESPN's deceptive coverage may actually accelerate the trend toward independent sports media and content creators who don't have the same financial conflicts of interest that compromise traditional network coverage. This shift in audience preferences creates long-term challenges for ESPN's business model because younger demographics that advertisers most want to reach are increasingly likely to seek out alternative sources for sports news and analysis, potentially making traditional sports media less valuable even as the sports themselves become more popular among those same demographic groups. The educational implications of ESPN's manipulation become particularly troubling when you consider that many journalism schools and sports media programs use ESPN coverage as examples of professional standards and best practices, meaning their deceptive practices may be inadvertently teaching future journalists that statistical manipulation is acceptable when corporate interests are involved. What ESPN's ratings manipulation ultimately reveals is that even they don't believe the WNBA can survive honest coverage about its dependency on Caitlin Clark, which raises fundamental questions about league sustainability and whether the growth they've been promoting is real or just an unsustainable bubble that collapses whenever their biggest star is unavailable. And if ESPN doesn't have confidence in the league's actual strength, why should fans, sponsors, or players believe in the narratives they're promoting about unprecedented success and historic growth that apparently requires statistical manipulation to maintain?